Dear ladies and gentlemen, пані та панове, I welcome you at our episode number 40 of our series of conversations and interviews with intellectuals in Ukraine and abroad, for those out there who are keen to learn more, think deeper, and hear from the original sources. І ми знову з вами із ювілейним 40-м випуском нашої серії розмов та інтерв'ю з інтелектуалами в Україні та за кордоном для тих, хто хоче дізнатися більше, думати глибше та чути з перших джерел. This is a project of PEN Ukraine, whose team is continuing their incredible work under the extremely difficult conditions of Russia's continuing war against Ukraine. PEN Ukraine still working on their full capacity, what is, I'm never tired to say, unbelievable. Це проєкт PEN Україна, вся команда якого продовжує свою роботу в надзвичайно складних умовах триваючої війни Росії проти України. І тим не менш, робота Центру PEN Україна працює на повну потужність. Я не втомлююсь сказати, наскільки це неймовірно. Дякую вам за це, наші колеги. The project is co-hosted by PEN International, which has continued to provide a platform for freedom of expression for those currently under the highest risk. The project is implemented with the support of the US Embassy in Ukraine and our traditional partners, who are PEN America, the Ukrainian Institute London, Ukraine World, Local History, Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, the Harman Institute at Columbia University, and we stream today's event to all partners' Facebook pages. Співорганізатором проєкту є Міжнародний ПЕН, який продовжує надавати платформу для свободи вираження поглядів тим, хто перебуває у групі найвищого ризику. Нагадаю, що проєкт втілюється за підтримки Посольства США в Україні і наших традиційних партнерів – ПЕН Америка, Український інститут Лондона, Україна Світ, Локальна історія, Український науково-дослідний інститут Гарвардського університету та Інститут Гаррівана при Колумбійському університеті. Ми стрімимо сьогоднішню подію на всі партнерські сторінки у Facebook. Захід відбуватиметься англійською мовою. My name is Olha Mukha and I work for PEN International and I'm delighted to introduce our today's guests. I welcome first of all Olha Musakovska, Ukrainian poet and translator. She's the author of 6 books. She started writing about Russia's war against Ukraine in its very beginning, with many poems from her 2015 book, Men, Women and Children, being surprisingly very relevant for today, like Emergency Bag Each Ukrainian Has, or Men Are Carrying War Inside Them. It's even scary, I should say. Her most recent book in Ukrainian, The God of Freedom, is being translated into English by Olena Jagins and the author together. Julia's poems have been translated into over 25 languages, most of them during the last year and published internationally. And many of her poems written recently during the last year appeared in her bilingual book Iron, published in Poland. She keeps her daily job in IT, in the executive role, by being active in the cultural field. And Julia has been participating in numerous literary events abroad during 2022, spreading the word about Russia's brutal war in Ukraine and serving as basically a cultural ambassador of Ukraine abroad. Thank you for that, Julia. I'm following your Facebook page and seeing a lot of activities. And thank you for bringing the word of Ukraine reality to the whole world as much as it's only possible, or even more. Julia will talk today to Dave Eggers, an American writer, editor, and publisher, widely known as the author of many books, among them The Circle you all probably know, The Monk of Mukha, Hologram of the King, What is What, and The Museum of Rain. He started from the writing in 2000 best-selling memoirs of heartbreaking work of staggering genius. And Eggers is also the founder of Timothy McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, a literary journal, a co-founder of the literacy project 826 Valencia, and the founder of Scholar Match, a program that matches donors with students needing funds for college tuition. Trained as a painter, his artworks have been exhibited in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit, Nevada Museum of Art, and others. Also, he got a number of humanitarian awards: Education, Dayton Literary Peace Prize, the TED Prize, finally some National Book Award, Pulitzer Prize. And back in 2018, he also co-founded the International Congress of Youth Voices, an annual gathering of 100 extraordinary young writers and activists. The landmark meeting in San Francisco resulted in a young youth written manifesto published in The Guardian. And, is there anything you haven't done yet? Because I was reading your biography as a novel itself. Wishing you all the best with your pilot license. And thank you for that great article in the New Yorker you published after your recent visit to Ukraine. I think that that's very important because you get this, as we were speaking about before starting our conversation, real perception of things which are going on. So our dear viewers, you're welcome to leave your questions in the comments, and I'm passing the stage to our guest I'm going to enjoy, Julia Musakovska and Dave Eggers. Please, stage is yours. Dave, your turn.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's my great pleasure to be here with you. Julia, where are you? I can't see you, but if you can hear me, tell me, we met in Lviv in December and at a dinner with our delegation from Pan America. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello,
oh, good.
Dave.
Oh,
I'm here, and I can see you as well.
Oh, good. Okay, you just appeared for me. Tell me, we're approaching the 1-year anniversary of the full-scale invasion. How do you mark this occasion? What is your state of mind? Are you more optimistic than you were at this time, last spring? Tell me what you and your colleagues and other writers and poets and activists are sort of doing to mark this occasion.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to continue the conversation that we have started in Lviv during your visit. It's always nice to be able to meet in person before talking on Zoom. And today is one of the days when we didn't have enough sleep because there was another massive missile attack at Ukraine during the night, and we were woken up by the air raid alert at 3 a.m. So there wasn't much sleep, of course. And as the date of the 24th is approaching, there are many attempts to summarize, to comprehend what has changed and what we have lived through. And I think we all are thinking about that at the moment. And looking back, I think when the war started, the full-scale aggression started, we were all shocked. And I think up until mid-April, we felt quite abandoned. We felt that Ukraine could only rely on ourselves, and our reality, our day-to-day job was just work and helping our friends, helping the army and the people in need. And for us, it was just a matter of survival, and it still is. But back then, I think the world was watching and testing if Ukraine could really hold off the Russian invasion and trying to decide whether they should give us weapons or it would just be a waste. It was the feeling at that time. I remember it very clearly. And it's been an emotional roller coaster when the joy, the positive emotions from the liberation of territories like the around Kyiv region was followed by this extreme discovery of atrocities by the hands of the Russian occupiers, what they have left behind. The mass cemeteries, the torture chambers, the facts about the deported children. And the entire world was shocked. But also the question remains whether these atrocities committed by Russians moved the world, or the ability of Ukrainians with that little weapons we had at that moment to take back our land and to fight off the enemy. I think that now we have realized that the war is not going to end soon, that this is not a sprint, but a marathon. However, now we feel the support, and of course, getting the military aid was critical for Ukraine's survival. And like we see that now many more Russian missiles are being shot down by the air defense. It's a very significant difference. So I don't know if the word optimistic is right here, but we are determined. We have to win because there is no other choice. As I mentioned, it's a matter of survival. But now I think we're also more confident of ourselves and what we can achieve, and also of those who stand with us, who are supporting us in Ukraine.
When you've traveled around the world since the invasion and talked to other groups, what are the first perceptions or misperceptions that you try to correct, or and what are the, I guess, false narratives that you encounter?
This is a very interesting question, very complex, and there are a lot of things that could be mentioned here. I think the main thing was just calling this Russia's war a conflict, or just the war in Ukraine. Somehow, when oppressor is being left out of the equation, as if they are not at fault or they don't exist. Basically, also that this thought that all Ukrainians just want to leave, that is very hurtful, because all of those leaving, they have this hope to come home, if they have a home to come back to, or at least come back to their country. And leaving in such circumstances is not like going on vacation or traveling to visit family. It's a completely devastating reason to leave everything behind, and also under extreme stress. So I think we keep repeating that even those leaving the country, they really want to come back. There are also many efforts from Russia's side to spread the propaganda and feed the media outlets with that, and people are perceptive to that. Even if they support Ukraine, they are sympathizing, of course, with us as victims suffering from the aggression, but they often repeat the narrative that this entire war is U.S. financed, and also that giving weapons to Ukraine just prolongs this war, and that we just have to sit and negotiate with Russia, and then the peace will come, without knowing the historical background of our relationship. Because as I mentioned, the propaganda was so huge and is still huge, and this narrative, this fake narrative of brotherly nations is also somehow inserted into people's minds, meaning that two Slavic nations, they cannot be enemies, they should just reconcile because they have so much in common. But now it's clearly visible that there is nothing in common between Russians and Ukrainians, and the huge thing is the set of values, of core values, that we really don't share with them. Of course, there's a part of the cultural thing. It's still this idea of greatness of Russian culture is present, and is somehow not conflicting with the events of the Russian war in Ukraine and the crimes of Russia committed in Ukraine. somehow these things exist completely separately as separate entities, and this is really infuriating. For example, the pieces of Russian culture are played in theaters, are exhibited abroad, and still the attention is drawn to Russia's greatness in some way. And now I know that our diplomats, our cultural activists have been doing a lot of work on the cultural front. The recent examples is the renaming of the Degas art piece from the Russian dancers to the dancers in the Ukrainian attire. It should really be a Ukrainian dancers, but it's still a compromise, so it's positive. There's progress, but also that we are trying to reclaim the artists who have at their core the Ukrainian identity, and this has been also changed for a couple of artists. Recently, it was about I think about Repin and then about Ayvazovsky. That Ayvazovsky was really an Ayvazan, who was an Armenian who lived in Ukraine, and to me it's very familiar because my grandfather is an Armenian who lived in Ukraine. So I shared this story with my mother, and it was surprising to her that it was a great figure of Russian arts that they learned about at school, and now suddenly we're discovering that this is a cultural appropriation. And there are so many examples of such artists. And there's that's a huge space for work, for explanations, and as long as people are open and they are willing to listen, then we will try to explain and to convince them and to take back what is ours.
Well, that was the point of our mission. The PEN America, our delegation came to Ukraine in December to highlight cultural erasure as a weapon of war, and as that a key part of the Russian strategy is to pretend that Ukrainian culture as a distinct entity never existed and should be subsumed again by the larger Russian identity. And so it was very interesting to see this fierce determination on the part of everyone that we met to reclaim, to re-identify, to make sure that the Ukrainian culture was made clear that it was very distinct. We visited the National Museum of Ukrainian History in Kyiv and talked with one of the guides there for a long time about her own efforts to educate one by one people that come into the museum, especially since 2014, people relocating to Kyiv from the east, and she felt like it was her responsibility, person after person, one by one, and school groups, to tell this history and clarify things. And she also drew an interesting distinction between generations. She told her story of her own mother, who had a different perception early on in the invasion. And I found this again and again, that people's parents and grandparents were not as, I guess, awake to distinct Ukrainian identity. And they were more resigned to seeing, they grew up with the Soviets, and they were resigned to yet another takeover. Can you talk a little bit about the generational divide? Those of you that grew up after independence have a more fierce and clear sense of Ukrainian identity than maybe the generations before that grew up under Soviet rule.
Well, I wouldn't say that this difference is purely generational. Of course, the younger generation is more active. This is just natural. But I think this difference depends mostly on the experience that one's family had during the Soviet occupation, especially. Because those who have been persecuted by the Soviets, those them or their families, their relatives, those who took part in the liberation movement, I mean, even older generations with that experience wouldn't see surrendering to Russia as an option. My family, from both sides of my parents, had horrible experience under Soviet rule, and Russia was always seen as if not an aggressor, but as a potential enemy. So my grandmother, for example, was deported from Poland in the World War II. Her family was deported as ethnic Ukrainians in the time of exchange of ethnic groups between the Soviet Union and Poland. So it was easier for Soviets to control the monolithic ethnicity, let's say, on the land they occupied. And my father had this experience when he was forced to quit the university because of his avid interest in foreign languages and Western culture. So there's actually zero sentiment about that in my family. So even my grandfather, who is still alive, and he was born in Armenia, and he served in the Soviet army during World War II because it was just they were forced to do that. He's 95, and he clearly says that Putin is a crazy maniac and he must be stopped. Of course, he cannot contribute, but his mind is set up that is pretty clear. But on the other hand, there were people who were a part of the system, of course, and some of them unfortunately passed this nostalgia for the Soviet times to the younger generation as well. And sometimes we hear the younger people who have never lived through Soviet time, that they feel that it was so nice, and the ice cream was tasty, and the sausage was cheap, and everybody was just nicer just because they heard it from their relatives. But we know, those who know history, they know the reason why the sausage was cheap. It's because the millions were doing the slave labor in the collective farms for Soviets. At the same time, many remember not just these things, but also Gulag and Holodomor, the great famine that was inflicted by Stalin, the artificial famine. And these memories are very vivid. So I guess, if you think about the percentage or the divide, it may be that the majority longing for the Soviet past are older people, but not the majority of the older people are that way. It's a little complicated, but it's how it is. So there are a lot of stories with senior citizens, for example, donating all their life savings to help the army, or old ladies volunteering to cook food and feed the military, or knit the socks for the army. Just do anything they can. So they want to do their best too. So I really wouldn't divide it by generations. It's a little different.
Well, I was also struck by when we met the deputy mayor of Bucha, and she was saying that most of the residents that stayed during occupation were much older. They refused to leave. And I kept meeting people whose grandparents, whose parents were still living in Mariupol or wherever and had refused to leave because this is their home. They refused to be driven out by the invasion. So it's a very complicated issue. But I think that also those older folks, the people that I interviewed, talked about I guess they were the older folks that were pessimistic about resisting this overwhelming Russian force. Once two things happened. Once the Ukrainians drove back the Russian forces from Kyiv, and then secondly, once the atrocities were found in Bucha, in Irpin, in Borodyanko, and then they became their minds were changed. One about the brutality possible from the Russian army, and also the possibility of victory, and that the Ukrainian resistance was so fierce that they grew more optimistic about fighting back over the long term. So I was struck also. I wanted to ask you. We toured a number of sites, including a little town called Yahidny, where Russian troops came to sort of set up a base to attack Chernihiv, and they took hostage about 350 people, and they kept them all in the basement of a school for about a month, and 12 people died during that occupation, and they were all kept in a very small basement and fed very little, and people died on the spot. And we got a tour from the groundskeeper of the school who showed us the site. And I remember hearing from other journalists like, oh, that story's been told many times. We don't need to tell it again. And I thought, well, I did not know this story, but as a journalist, you do hear this. You think, oh, okay, well, I guess we can't tell it again. And I came back and I told this story, and no one I knew had heard this. So I decided to write it again in a longer piece that I'm just finishing. Can you talk about how do you keep the Western media especially is so driven by what's new? Tell us the new story. We're not going to go back and retell that old story. We're not going to go back to the mass grave at behind the church, at St. Joseph's Church. We're not going to retell some of these stories. How do you tell the world that we need to continue to remind everybody about what happened, especially in those early days? And how do you keep the Western? Do you find that the Western attention has waned? How do you keep people from forgetting all of these atrocities and war crimes early on in the invasion?
Well, I think this phenomena of Ukraine fatigue has started pretty early. We have started hearing about it already last summer. So just several months into war, and everybody's already tired about this gore details. But this is our reality. This is what we are living through. And this is the truth. So I know this may be complicated and more difficult to go with these news and to reach the outlets, to reach the people. But I think once you tell the really personal stories and you reach on the human level, it's a completely different conversation. And that is why I was using all of my vacation time last year to travel and to talk about the war in Ukraine, because and this is really work. When you meet people at the airport and you talk about Ukraine, you meet people at the hotel and you talk about Ukraine, because they are curious, and sometimes they have all these stereotypes and these fake narratives that you need to break. And also you're a witness, so you have to testify that is our role. So it may be a systematic and boring work, but we have to continue it. And telling personal stories of different people who have changed their life. For example, the artists, the writers who have abandoned their craft and went to serve in the war. We have many stories like that. Well, we have no other choice than to keep repeating and to just to explain why it's not just important for Ukraine and what would happen if Ukraine would fall. I think many people don't realize that this the failure of Ukraine's struggle of independence for freedom, it will mean the horrible thing for the entire world, and it will be a signal for many other for other authoritarian states that they may do as they wish.
Yeah.
So reminding that here we're not just fighting for our own freedom, defending our own land, but we are standing basically as a shield from this evil to spreading further. So this is of course, constant reminders. And I'm really not afraid that it will get boring. I think with systematic work, with this discussions on every level, discussion and making human connections on every level, it will really be helpful.
Well, I think that that's where storytelling is important, to make sure that the stories are told in many different venues, are told very personally, are told from new perspectives, and that we don't get discouraged or bogged down in thinking like with the statistics, these have all been told before. That's an old story, but we have to make sure, especially you as Ukrainian writers, continue to find new ways to awaken audiences and to make people feel what it's like, and to tell those stories of those who can't tell their own stories. And I wonder, can you talk about your own practice, starting in 2014, but also especially in the last year? How is your own writing? Do you ever find your own fatigue where you would like to write about something other than Russian aggression, and that you're, I don't know, how do you balance sort of addressing this and telling the world what's happening with your own maybe personal desire to write about something else occasionally?
Well, as you mentioned, reaching emotionally can be very effective. So poetry is a great tool for that. I think I haven't been able to write in the first weeks of war, and then when I started writing, it was the first poem was in English because I just couldn't find words to express what was going on in Ukrainian, and I was also answering dozens of messages from friends and colleagues from abroad who were trying to understand what was going on. And I think the poem that I wrote, it was not meant to be a poem, but it became like that. And I think that poet is always a poet, and it's just the way it is. Actually, I started writing about Russia's war back in 2014, 2015, when it was just happening in the eastern part of Ukraine, and with the illegal annexation of Crimea, there was this feeling that this is not going to end in those spots, that this is some kind of looming threat for the entire country. So I was writing a lot about war back then. So when the invasion happened, I don't feel like there's anything other to write about at this moment. Basically, I only write about war if I write, and I don't write a lot because there are some events that really just knock you off your feet and you become numb, and even if you feel that you want to scream, you cannot get anything out of yourself, or you just feel that you're somehow unrelated to what had happened. Because now when I'm staying in Ukraine but still Lviv is a city very far from the front line that has only been bombed about 10 or 12 times. Well, I know it sounds very strange, but it's still not affected as much as the other parts of Ukraine. So sometimes you feel that you don't have the right to be telling other people's stories. But somehow sometimes there's this collective emotion that you also feel and you really want to express. So it's mostly about war for me. And I think the war affects how we see things. And even if, things like love, family, and friendship, they don't go away during war. They still exist. And now we even appreciate these things more than before, because, each day may be our last one. So even if we write about these things, it is still through the lens of war. So even if we don't write about war, it becomes war after all, just on a different level. And also the way we read has become different. Everything is being read and comprehended through the lens of war. For example, this book that we are translating now with Olha Jennings, my recent book in Ukrainian, there's this poem about home violence, and now we just read it as Ukraine resisting the aggressor. That's the metaphor you see in it. This is how our mind works right now. I also don't think I remember anyone writing recently about something else than the war, except for the children's books. And there are a lot of books written for children about the war. There's this great example that is called The Children of Air Raid Alert by Larissa Denisenko, that has been also has been translated into various languages already, or this seemingly childish book by Alexander Mehed, which is not a book for children, but it's composed that way, it's structured that way. It's called Cat, Rooster, and Cupboard. It's based on the events that happened in Borodyanka and in Kyiv suburbs. And it talks about the atrocities by occupiers. So, I mean, children still need to have their childhood. So all kinds of children books are still being written, and it is very important. I feel that way. And you're a writer of children's books. I mean, you're also an author of children's books.
Yeah, I was very moved when I was there. The funeral for Vakulenko was happening, and I felt very shattered by his death and the way he died, and because I felt kinship with him in terms of what he wrote about, and some of our friends from Penn, Ukraine, went to that funeral. I think it was maybe an 8-hour drive from Kyiv, but when we were on the tail end of our trip. But I was struck. We early on in the war, we have a gallery here in San Francisco, and we had a show of Ukrainian art a few months after the invasion, to try so that those artists could sell their work and maybe help pay their rent. And when I went to Kyiv, I met 3 of those artists that were in the show, and we met at a cafe and we talked about their lives since the invasion. And 2 of them all 3 of them are regular commercial artists who work. They haven't left. They've been working throughout the war. And although one of them has found that her work, she is a graphic designer and a poster artist and an illustrator. Many of her clients, when they find out she's from Ukraine, these are international clients, they'll like her work, they'll be ready to give her a job, and then when they find out she's in Ukraine, they'll disappear because I assume they think that she might be killed at any time. But people don't realize that what I've been trying to get across in my essays about my trip is just how incredibly high functioning Kyiv and Lviv and so much of the West is. It's astonishing that the stores are full of food, the restaurants are working, there are concerts, life is going on, the subways are full. There is an unbelievable resistance in everybody's determination to continue living and living fully, even with this existential war going on. And that is what I found was most missing in Western media that I've read, is that we've always been very inspired by the way that the British lived through World War II and the Nazi bombings of London and things like that. But we need to remember that Ukraine's acts of just continuing on during this war is itself incredibly inspiring, and another reason for that we need to be giving all of our support in any way we can, but including on the very small level supporting artists and even commercial artists that are trying to continue working and living in the country during a war. It's astonishing to see that people were doing animation and video game design and things like that in the middle of once weekly bombings. It's do you find when you travel in the West, do people understand what life is actually like in Lviv, in Kyiv, and these cities? That life is going on, that the hotels are open, the restaurants are open, the stores, gift shops, all of that?
Well, I'm telling them about this, but mostly people think that everything is somehow damaged or broken. But it also I can feel that side of the story in my daily work, because I work in IT. That's my daily job. And the first weeks were very challenging because we had to keep our business running, and there were just so many messages from the clients asking what's going on and how is everything functioning. But then after a while, they realized that nothing has changed from our side. What we have been delivering, we were still delivering. But I think there are two extreme sides here. There's this point that Ukrainians are just undefeatable, and they're so resilient. They're almost superhumans, and everything is just great, and everything is functioning. And there's this another extreme point, thinking that everything is damaged and dead, and everything is bad, and everybody just should just leave. Especially when you have a child and you stay with your child in Ukraine, even in such safe place, relatively safe place, I would say, as Lviv. They would try to persuade you to leave the country, although of course it's not easy to do that. I have been talking about that earlier, how difficult it is to take your roots out from the ground and just leave into the unknown. And that is I think the main reason that the older people who haven't been traveling much, they just cannot imagine that. For them it's much worse than staying under the falling missile. So it has been different, really, for people. But I'm also interested in your impressions. What were your expectations when you were traveling, coming here? What did you imagine that Ukraine would be? And then what has changed after your trip to Lviv and the Kyiv region?
Well, I did expect a war zone from border to border. I did not expect, even just pulling into Lviv and seeing a fully, traffic and hotels and lights. I mean, there were generators, and we had to step over all the generator wires downtown to get, but the fact that in these cities, life was going on, and there were at every, that there were, high-end restaurants operating, and you could buy anything that you wanted to. The first grocery store we went to outside Kyiv was bigger than any grocery store I've ever seen here, I think, and it was absolutely full with everything that you'd ever want. And I think that surprised everybody that I came back to tell. I said, there's no, there are tens of thousands of trucks coming over the border from Poland. When we had to wait 3 hours to get over, and you're in this line of endless supply trucks, commerce happening at a regular basis. I mean, not regular, but it's continuing. But I found that incredibly surprising and inspiring to see how high functioning things were. But you're right. We don't want to get caught in an extreme of saying everything is okay and that the Ukrainians are superhuman and et cetera. But at the same time, I've been trying to tell people that you'd be astonished at how high functioning things are, and also sort of I guess I knew of the grim sort of the determination, but also sort of the ability to have a sense of humor every so often too. Like I bought this at a souvenir shop early on. I bought a lot of things to bring back. I interviewed so many people, too many to even write about, but I was, I guess, astonished at just the fierceness of people determined to stay, especially younger people that I met, students, PhD students, people that are working on anti-corruption measures they were working on before the war. Some agencies that were working in the East to make sure that sort of local governments were functioning. That movement since to sort of create more sort of stable local governments to resist this sort of colonial takeover. It's 2-3 months since I left, and I'm still unpacking everything that I saw and everybody that I talked to. And even I was very sad to leave because I loved my time there so much, even as grim and shattering as it was to see the site of the mass graves, to go to Yehidny, to see the bridge at Irpin, to see the destroyed neighborhoods, to meet people who had lost loved ones. It was alternately shattering and inspiring, I guess, is what that's not the most original insight, but I've been trying to communicate that in any way I can, and also to talk to people about exactly what you said. There is a movement in the West, or I think a thought, a sort of a middle brow thought, saying, why not, now that the Russians have been driven back to the East, why not negotiate when it comes to Crimea, especially, and you're finding that. And so I talked to so many activists and historians in Kyiv about trying to counteract that narrative that says, that, and we went to the U.S. embassy too, and they were also talked about that, which is, a real thing that Putin is trying to weaponize war, grind down the Ukrainian resolve, and also grind down Western support by saying this is going to go on for years. We're going to continue bombing. You might as well come to the negotiating table and give up, the Donbas and Crimea, for example. And no one I met in Ukraine was willing to even talk about that kind of capitulation, which I found really fascinating, that there wasn't any softening of resolve. Anyway, I'm going on and on. I'm not even sure what your question was, but there's well, so tell me about the rest of your week. What do you do on a daily basis? For those in the West that might not know what your daily life is like, you're working in IT, so you're in front of a screen working for, who are your clients?
Well, this is a very down to earth question, but yeah, well, I work for a company that makes software for networking devices, and it's a very specialized expertise, which is not easy to find. So it puts us in sort of fortunate place in these times of war. We are difficult to replace at the moment, so our clients keep coming and coming back and continuing to work with us. So
These are international clients. They're outside Ukraine.
We work mostly with the Silicon Valley clients and with Israel also, and some of the European Union countries. It's very challenging right now with the entire market declining, but this specialization helps. But of course it's a lot of extra efforts that now have to be invested to do business development at the moment.
Can you tell me also about your own work? We talked about it in Lviv at dinner when we had that larger dinner together, but it must be very bittersweet at this moment. And I talked to other writers about it in Ukraine, about how because of the war, there's increased interest in the West, in Ukrainian writing, in Ukrainian poetry. And it must be very bittersweet to know that suddenly more foreign translations, more foreign publications are interested in your work as a result of this horrifying invasion. And so I wonder how you navigate that, and that responsibility you feel to continue working, to respond to the moment, and how do you, I guess, leverage this moment to make sure people know the history of Ukraine, the distinction of Ukrainian identity, etc. I think you know what I mean. Sort of talk about this sort of time. Yeah.
Well, as you mentioned, it is bittersweet, and it's not personal anymore. So I'm not doing it for myself. I feel that every opportunity is the chance to speak about Ukraine and to contribute to the promotion of the Ukrainian culture abroad. So of course, there has been a huge surge of interest, and I hope it will continue, because Ukrainian literature and poetry is very rich, and we are being discovered right now. And it's not just us as authors, but it's our country that is being discovered, and our culture and our language as well. And everything is about putting Ukraine on the map and confirming our identity, that we exist and we are who we are. And I think it also contributes to how people are eager to provide support for Ukraine. I actually would love to continue this conversation in different formats, because we still have a lot to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to your more detailed material about your visit when it's going to be published. And it was really interesting to hear about your activism in the US on how you're trying to convince people of what this Russia's war in Ukraine is about. And just on the final note, what do you think that intellectuals abroad need to do to help end this brutal Russia's war against Ukraine?
Well, I don't know how much power we have to end it. I think we do have power to remind people and to fight against that compassion fatigue that I think is the real enemy in the West. To make sure, you know, this is what we talked about at the embassy. There, you know, every few months, Congress has to reallocate billions to go toward the effort. The U.S. Congress has to reallocate billions of dollars to go toward not just weapons for the Ukrainian army, but also money that goes through USAID to pay government salaries in Ukraine. There's a lot of sort of funding on that level that needs to be continually allocated. And the longer the war lasts, the more there will be members of Congress that are not willing to vote for more funding. And so we need to continue to remind people, just as you say, that this is not just a war between Ukraine and Russia, but this is the point of the spear that if Ukraine had not resisted the way they did, then that would, and if this war is not resolved in a way that Ukraine and Western interests are want, it could embolden other autocrats. It would affect Taiwan. It would affect a lot of different regions that might be the next countries to be subsumed by their, you know, historical colonial powers. And so I think we have to remind people of that. And that's one of our roles as storytellers, as writers, to remind people what's at stake and just how dangerous it is to give up any ground at all to a maniac like Putin. So anyway, I think it looks like we're out of time.
A bit, but that was quite challenging to stop you both. And I know that you could continue for longer. I have a couple of questions. First, I have a question to you, Dave. What unexpected you learned about Ukrainian culture when you visited Ukraine?
What was the third
unexpected
word?
Something unexpected you learned about the culture, probably not about the people.
Well, I was while I was there was a lot of debate about writers like Pushkin and Dostoevsky, and sort of there was anytime at any meal, if you wanted to get everybody very animated in the discussion, you said all you had to say is, what about Pushkin? And this idea of sort of re-examining the role of writers like that have had in this sort of Russian colonial narrative. And I think that was fascinating. We went to a candlelight concert the last night that we were in Kyiv, and it was classical music, but of course there's no Tchaikovsky being played that night. You know, like seeing that moment where there's and a library what we went to had purged most of its books of sort of the Dostoevskys and Pushkins of the world. I think that sort of re-examining identity of people like Bulgakov and claiming who is a genuine Ukrainian writer who has contributed to this colonial narrative, this examination of can we accept or still read books by some of these writers. I found that very fascinating and unexpected. Does that answer your question? I think it's so raw and so new that, of course, this debate will be going on for quite some time, but to see it at this moment was fascinating to me. And I think everybody was, some people were not so conflicted, but I think many people were, you know.
Yeah, I think this is still a big work. Yeah.
What's that?
Ukrainians, I think that this is a big work Ukrainians still have to do themselves, right? This kind of identity which been really damaged for decades and for a very long period. So it will require some time for sure.
Yeah.
And I have
And
a question to Yulia from one of our listeners as well. I would like to ask you as a poet, what is poetry capable of doing apart from other ways, genres of testifying?
Mhm.
What is the main, weapon of poetry nowadays?
Poetry is always about the emotion, and it's also a quick reaction. So when you talk about a selfish purpose of writing a poem, it's something that helps you cope with the emotions you're feeling at the moment, and it's very personal. Sometimes you need to write out this poem to get out of the shock, for example. So and the similar experience, the similar emotion can help some other person, can help the readers sharing this emotion cope with the event. So it's not just testifying, it has some sort of ability to unite around this collective emotion that we are often feeling together. I have felt that, and with the social media, it has a huge potential of being spread over to the people.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that when you mentioned that it's barely possible to write anything then about the war, I thought that possibly first half of a year I wasn't even capable to read anything not about the war. And poetry was probably the most powerful pieces, which sometimes would just literally keep me together. Because this is such a powerful tool to express the emotion and the pain, which sometimes can't be really verbalized. Thank you both for spreading the word of the reality of Ukraine and mentioning Volodya Vakulenko, especially our good friend we lost in this just crazy war, and pointing out those different contexts, high functioning country under continuous attack, and the deep perceptual differences when all changed and nothing has changed, right? This is a huge existential difference all the Ukrainians are living over today. And for our traditional question, if you all ask yourself, what can I do as an intellectual today? Dave responded, keep reminded, don't get tired of this informational waves. And I want also to quote very short lines from Yulia's poem. Ask not what fear can do to you. Ask what you can do to fear, so it doesn't define you. I think those are beautiful lines which really speaks out about what each Ukrainian all around the world feel today. And this is what our dialogues are about. Genuine perspective of the reality and your own responsibility about that. This all would not be possible without our great guests. Thank you for joining us today and for incredible conversation. I felt so sad to stop, and for the support for our partners, the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, Pan America, the Ukrainian Institute London, Ukraine World, Local History, Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, the Harman Institute at Columbia University. And gratitude, of course, to Pan Ukraine, which continues to stand at the front lines in the name of freedom and truth. Pan International is proud to be a platform that supports freedom of expression. Thank you again, and join our next episode, will be held next Thursday, February 25, at special time, 4 p.m. Kyiv time, 2 p.m. London time. We'll be hosting Oksana Rozumna, Ukrainian writer and philosopher, and Peter Godwin, known writer. So follow our dialogues on the war, spread the word, stand with Ukraine. This is our shared responsibility today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Yulia.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.